Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Lokahi, our first ever Lokahi Ocean Science fundraiser. I want to thank, first of all, Santa Catalina School for this beautiful venue. Secondly, I want to thank our family who is here from across the country for raising us. And then lastly, I want to thank all of you who are taking the time to be here and support us. That really means so much to us that you showed up today. So thank you.
A few final logistics before we get started. There's bathrooms in the lobbies. No food or drink allowed in here. There'll be plenty at the party afterwards. And then if you could silence your cell phones for the presentation.
And in terms of schedule, we'll show a video sharing our work, give our presentation, and then we have 3 awesome guest speakers lined up for you guys, followed by a party. So you'll be sitting for an hour, and then you have a party. That's all.
Cool.
Yeah. So next up is our video.
5 years ago, as a student in Stanford's D School, I asked myself, how might we redesign the research expedition?
Welcome to Lokahi Ocean Science. I'm Audrey.
And I'm JP.
Aboard our sailing research vessel, we lead low-carbon, anti-colonial, conservation research expeditions.
We met as students at Stanford University, where we sailed to the world's most remote ecosystems and learned how to support local conservation with cutting-edge research and technology.
As we became aware of the increasingly tenuous state of our biosphere, we chose to be the change we wished to see in the world. 4 years ago, we sold everything we owned and bought a sailboat. We then spent 2 years transforming it into a seaworthy research vessel designed around the needs of our future collaborators.
We set sail for La Paz, Mexico, and ever since, we've been working with Pelagios Cacunca, a local nonprofit dedicated to the creation and management of marine protected areas.
For me, Lokahi is the ideal platform to do research because it was built for that. JP and Audrey built it for research. It was built from the ground up. It's a fantastic research boat because it gave us access to remote areas that we haven't been able to reach before. And you're there in the field. So you live there, you stay at Lokahi, and then you have all the tools to perform whatever you want to do in the field. So really for us was like a breakthrough. So with Lokahi, we've been working with Hammerhead Nurseries here on the Bay of La Paz and a little further north. And it's been amazing. We've seen new nurseries that we didn't know they existed. The fishermen, the conservationists, the academics, even the government, everything is in place. So Gulf California is a place where we should invest our time and funds to do really great conservation work.
Together, we are designing a new climate-smart marine protected area in the Gulf of California that will create a sustainable economy for local communities. Compared to previous expeditions, our first field season with them reduced emissions, increased community engagement, and extended time in the field from weeks to months.
We learned that conservation efforts in developing countries are often limited by access to capable research platforms like ours. In our vision for the future, a state-of-the-art research sailing vessel will empower local stewards across Latin America to manage their own oceans without contributing to climate change.
The Lokahi experience really was, I feel like it's the vessel of dreams for scientists. It was a perfect work environment to grow and learn, for Lokahi to do that, to come here to Mexico and give students such as myself this opportunity. Really is one of the things I am most grateful for.
JP and Audrey, which are perfect. No, these are the ideal technicians in the field. They know how to do every single thing.
You know, the intentions are pure. And when the intentions are pure, everything just works perfectly. And I feel like Lokahi really knows it.
No, pues fuimos buen equipo, pues, un buen equipo y la verdad trabajamos muy bien, muy bien.
How might we redesign the research expedition?
I love working on boats. There's nothing like the feeling of being on a team with a common goal. When we forget ourselves through our dedication to a greater purpose, great things happen. In the Hawaiian language, this harmony, this oneness, it's called Lokahi.
Did you like the video?
Yeah, even though that video is only like 4 minutes long, it represents many years of work. So I hope you enjoyed it. But now we'll be moving on to a quick presentation where we'll kind of just go into more detail about everything that you saw in the video and some of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. So our talk is called Being the Change: Conservation Science and Climate Action. Why these two things? Well, as a scientist, your job is to reveal truths about the natural world. But in my opinion, once you understand a truth, you also have the moral imperative to act upon that knowledge. Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Zen Buddhist that I really admire, he calls this engaged Buddhism, right? Where you act upon what you know to be true. That's why we want to, with our work, embody the change that we know the world needs. Knowing what we know about global environmental change, inequality, colonialism, and everything else.
So first, a bit about us. If you don't know, JP and I are married, and I grew up here in Monterey Bay and spent a lot of time near the ocean. I got to study here at Santa Catalina, at Hopkins Marine Station, and at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. After that, I attended Stanford University, where I studied ecology and evolution.
Yeah, and my family, I grew up on the East Coast, but my family's from Argentina, so I'm a native Spanish speaker. And growing up, and when I first got to Stanford, I really wanted to be an astronaut. But later, I realized that working and living on the ocean, you still have to like engineer and design this really cool spaceship, and you're days away from rescue, but you get to jump in the water every day and see aliens, which is way cooler. So I'm really living my best life. Yeah. Audrey and I first met in this really cool study abroad program at Stanford called Stanford at Sea. We actually have some alumni in the back and up here. This course, you spend 5 weeks sailing around the Pacific on a really large, tall ship with about 40 people on it. You sail by the stars, you do night watches, steering by hand, you raise and lower all the sails by hand. It's all with traditional methods, and you're gathering oceanographic data the whole way.
So while I was at sea, I read this really neat quote by the Buddhist poet Gary Snyder, who says that, "I've said that people should try to become paisanos, meaning people of the place, people of the land. But note, there is no limit to how big that place can be." So I put on a climbing harness and I climbed 100 feet aloft to the top of the mast, and I looked down and I saw a tiny spaceship surrounded by unending blue. And that taught me two things. One is that, as you all know, we live on an ocean planet. And the ocean is our life support system, and it's also our path out of this giant global pickle that we found ourselves in. And then second, that boats are a vehicle for social change, which means that when we're living on a boat together, we learn some of the cultural changes that we need to then implement on a global scale. We learn about deep interdependence and finite resources.
I really like this picture because this very day I had a huge fork in my life. We were at this island that had 40 people living on it. It was a 10-day sail from the nearest other island. And everyone, all the crew, all the students were on the island, except for myself and the captain. We were doing an anchor watch. And as we sat there, right next to us pulled up a small 40-foot boat with a small family on it. I couldn't believe it. I turned to the captain. I said, "Cap, how much does one of those cost?" He goes, "If you look on Craigslist, they're pretty dirt cheap." And that changed everything for me.
Not quite dirt cheap, but. So then all these pieces started to come together. We saw sailboats as a way to study our oceans without burning fossil fuels. We saw boats as a vehicle for social change. And then we also saw boats as a way to actualize the future that we want for future generations. So this is a quote by Terry Tempest Williams, who you might know. She's an author about our relationship to the environment and also a good friend of my grandmother's. And she says, "The eyes of the future are looking back at us and are praying for us to see beyond our own time."
This graph, in my opinion, is probably the most important chart of this millennium. It was put together by the International Panel on Climate Change, and it shows a graph of projected temperature increase in the next century. And the black line is the present, or the past up till the present, and then right there where it diverges, that's where we are right now. And the lines to the right represent whatever we choose to do moving forward. And as a global community, we agreed to keep that below 1.5, that blue line on the bottom, to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. We're going to cross that line in just a handful of years. And we're more on track for that middle line, that orange line. If we follow that line, eventually there will be no Amazon rainforest. There will be no ice in the temperate zones. There won't be any coral reefs. 1 billion people could lose their homes and be displaced. And for 20 million years, they'll look back and they'll say, what was going on in that one generation? But it's up to us to choose which of those paths to take.
And so to sit in this room right now, in this present moment, means that we have immense privilege. We have the resources, and we're alive right now to be able to do something. And so with that immense privilege comes action. So out of all these ideas and experiences and philosophies, Lokahi Ocean Science was born. Our mission is to enable marine conservation in Latin America and also to inspire climate action across the globe. Lokahi means to realize oneness, something akin to that feeling of looking down but then and seeing your sailboat, but then realizing that the whole planet is our sailboat. And so, but how do we actually do this? That sounds great. So let's break down into 3 steps. 1, informing conservation. So we do that by leading low-carbon research expeditions in which we gather the data to inform management decisions.
Maybe even more importantly, number 2 is empowering others. We want to build capacity in the students that live in these regions to become future conservation leaders of their own home, and also build skills for the local communities that live there so they're prepared for a just transition. And finally, we want to inspire action by motivating cultural and political change through storytelling and outreach with everything we do.
So what does that look like? In 2023, we set sail for La Paz, Mexico, where we linked up with some local conservationists and got to work. We had a year where we gathered some data, we made a lot of friends, and we came back forever changed.
Here's some numbers to summarize what we did. In a year, we burned less than 10 gallons of diesel. We sailed over 2,000 nautical miles. Our annual operating costs were about $36,000. Between ourselves and our crew, we had about 1,600 cups of coffee. We led 50 scientific dives, surveyed hundreds of kilometers of coastline with drones, tagged dozens of sharks, and had over 40 local students on board that we helped train for the next generation of conservation. And all of this is the idea of helping to create up to 16,000 square kilometers of new marine protected areas. Some of the lessons we learned in this year is that Latin America has an extremely high conservation potential. Every Latin American country has dozens and dozens of world-class scientists that know exactly what data needs to be collected to help advocate for the right policies that we know are going to protect the oceans and help things to recover. What they need are research platforms to get them there, to collect this data, and field technicians that know how to do so.
Then not only is the data we collected useful, but also the experience itself of the expedition helped bring different stakeholders together. So we had shark fishermen having dinner with conservation scientists having dinner with us. And we got to talk about the different ways of knowing that we share and the different ways that we see the ocean and the visions that we share. And so that experience itself was, for me, the most powerful.
So now we're gearing up for another field season in 2025. We'll be sailing back to Baja, but this time we want to scale up both the scope and the volume of our research.
So what we know is that climate change poses a serious threat to marine ecosystems and local livelihoods in this region. We also know that we have marine protected areas as a key tool to help build resilience to these upcoming threats.
And the Gulf of California has many marine parks already established. However, many of these are sometimes referred to as what's called paper parks. So here's an image of a really large national park called Espiritu Santo off the coast of La Paz. And it's pretty representative of a lot of the parks that you'll see in the region. The gray boundaries are the boundaries of the park. However, you'll see less than about 1.6%, the orange area, is actually a place where you're not allowed to fish. On top of that, there's little to no enforcement. And even worse, the local stakeholders are at odds about what the park should be doing, what are its goals, and what the future for everyone is. And when that happens, they're not usually excited about following the rules that are there that no one's enforcing anyways. But there are lots of really well-managed marine protected areas throughout the Gulf. Even though they're tiny, the local community is all really excited about it. They often have really flourishing ecotourism opportunities, and they look just like this. There's thousands of fish, dozens of different species across all the trophic levels, really good sustainable economies, and then the fishermen that live just outside have plenty of fish to catch. So the theme of all of the different research questions that we want to ask in this next year is about these little red dots. So these are those really good, effective marine reserves that I was telling you about. We want to help add more dots. We want to help grow these dots and connect them. And we want to do so in a way where everyone that lives there is really excited about it.
So how do we make protected areas that are resilient to climate change? Luckily, we even have some researchers in this room who have created guidelines about how to do so. And they're called climate-smart marine protected areas. And in this graph, you'll see the hypothesized ways that where this fish lives will change with climate change. And so you can start to imagine the ways that knowing how climate change will affect the region will affect where we choose to protect. More specifically, we want to start looking for climate refugia, which means finding areas that will experience less environmental stress than others and choosing to protect those areas. Additionally, we want to find key habitats of critically endangered species, like nurseries for the scalped hammerheads, and make sure we're protecting those spots. We want to figure out where the fish are going to go. Maybe they'll even retreat deeper into colder waters, and making sure that we're protecting deep sites too. And then lastly, we want to create a fine-scale map of habitats in the region to make sure that we have diverse habitats represented within protected areas. So those are some of the research objectives and ways that we can use data to increase the efficacy of a marine protected area, which will have implications for decades to come. And then secondly, the community engagement is another super key piece, and without which all of that is useless. So with the community engagement piece, we want to interview hundreds of local stakeholders to figure out what they want and what their hopes, dreams, fears, all those things are. And then we want to help fishermen develop the skills they need, like developing ecotourism skills, ecological monitoring, so that they'll be prepared for a just economic transition with the implementation of these parks.
So we have plenty of research partners that are helping us come up with and tackle these questions. For example, the Western Flyers donated their vessel when they're going down for the first time in 60 years to collect data for us on all the oceanographic elements down there. Some students here at Santa Catalina School are helping us to map out all of the mangroves in the region. Loveland Living Planet Aquarium is sending us veterinary techs that can help us improve our tagging procedures. And then we're working with Stanford scientists to help understand how do we think about climate change when we're designing these marine protected areas. And many other projects are in the making. And if you want to learn more details, we love talking about these. Come find us at the party or check out our website. We're constantly putting up new stuff there talking about these projects.
So after the success and energy of our first field expedition, we are excited to continue this work for decades to come. Our vision is a vessel capable of supporting a large team of local conservationists, artists, activists, and community members in expeditions across the Americas.
A platform like this would not only inform ocean conservation across the entire continent, but it would also culturally connect us to remind us that the solutions to our global problems must transcend borders. Thank you. Yeah, totally.
So next up, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker I've known for about 10 years and was the first person to show me a nudibranch in a tide pool and give me snorkel gear and have me look in a steelhead in this tiny river and to inspire me to ask my own independent research questions. He's also has a PhD from Stanford University and began this pioneering program here at Catalina where he asks students to get in the field and ask big questions. So with that, I give you Dr. Christian Riley.
Thanks everyone for coming. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you this afternoon. I feel like I always say something like that when I'm speaking in public, but talking about a former marine ecology research student before she embarks on a research cruise in a vessel that she and her partner have outfitted themselves, it's maybe particularly true today. I think Audrey and JP have done an outstanding job describing their project, and I get excited every time I hear about it. But I wanted to talk a little about why I think this type of work is important, especially in my domain of science education. I've often said to my students that one of the jobs of the scientist is to think something that no one's ever thought before. And the best way to do that is to see things that few people have ever seen before. And the easiest way to do that is to go places that few people have ever gone before. I think that has a nice inspiring and kind of visionary ring to it, but it's hard to put into action. For most places that only a few people have gone before, there's a reason, and usually a bunch of reasons. JP and Audrey provide an incredible example of what can happen if you take your skills as a technical problem solver seriously, and you commit yourself to solving the problems that stand between you and the answers that you seek. It's been amazing watching them outfit their boat and forge collaborations and build data acquisition skills for working on the water and under the water and with remote communities. They're consummate communicators and educators themselves, and they've committed not only to going and having this experience, but to bringing back new data to their collaborators. Scientifically, this is really useful because Lokahi, as a vessel and as an organization, is small and light and can get into spaces that may have historically been overlooked. I think other folks are going to be able to speak to the nimbleness of Lokahi and all that it's going to be making possible scientifically. But educationally, Audrey and JP are using their vessel and its drones as eyes and ears of students here in Monterey so that younger students can begin to ask questions about changes on the edges of both local and distant bays. They've already been into our classroom several times, introducing the methods that they use to ask questions about open water communities. And more recently, they're beginning to act as mentors to a group of students who are trying to ask questions about tracking changes in mangrove communities along the coastlines of the Gulf of California. And here they're involving students in real scientific collaborations and letting them see how those pieces work. And they're planning drone flights and mapping out cruise tracks to help get answers to important mutual questions. This event comes at a neat time in my teaching year My sophomores, the 12th MERP class, have recently come back from spending a weekend in Big Sur at the University of California's Big Creek Reserve, where we spend the weekends studying a small population of endangered steelhead in the creek. We spend a lot of time thinking about how these little fish connect coastal lands and the sea. These fish spend their formative years in the creek, and then they head out to the ocean to take advantage of all the oceanic resources to grow, and then they come back to their natal stream, bringing all that they've gained at sea with them. Audrey was a member of MERP Class 2, and now, 10 years later, like the steelhead, she's come back from the sea with a ton of resources to share. I couldn't be more excited or grateful for the explorations to come, and I hope that, like the steelhead, Lokahi comes back for years to come. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah, of course.
Perfect.
I've always wanted to be a steelhead. Thank you, Christian. That was so wonderful. Our next speaker is John Ryan, who's been an MBARI scientist for over 20 years and studied everything from phytoplankton ecology to whale acoustics. We're really excited to have him speak to you today because we really admire his unique approach to science in developing novel techniques, prioritizing collaboration, and just trying to make the world a better place. And we had the pleasure of sailing just over this fall to look for some phytoplankton. We're so excited that he's here today. Thanks, John.
Good afternoon. Yeah, first of all, Audrey and JP, thank you for being you. Yeah, I first met Audrey and JP at a conference at Stanford University's main campus last year. And there were many presentations that day, all lightning talks, where you just get a glimpse of what people are doing and to stir the pot, give you ideas about new collaborations and new possibilities. And right away when I heard them speak, it kind of touched my soul because it brought me right back to why I got into the science in the first place. I got into science because I wanted to help humanity live in greater harmony with nature. And I thought science was a real essential tool in that. And there at that conference, I heard my younger self, reaching into the world and to create something new, to create a change. And so it wasn't the polished presentation, but it was polished. It was really good, like how you hand off, and very dynamic and beautiful, but it was just that how they lived their principles and how I want to be part of that. So on top of that, turns out they're docked in Moss Landing, where our institute is. So sometimes the universe just says, yeah, and that's what it was. So when we were doing a field program this year, it was about studying microscopic algae, specifically the kinds that can cause harm. And along this coast, it's a species of diatom that produces a substance called domoic acid that's useful to the cells, phytoplankton cells, but toxic to us. NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, funds this research. And we were, no doubt, going to go out there with a big ship with a lot of people, because sometimes you need to do that. The carbon footprint is definitely bigger on the beautiful research vessel Rachel Carson. However, we needed reconnaissance. We needed to go out there and look for information, gather data that would help us decide where to send this big ship. And so we sort of took two approaches to that. One of them was an autonomous underwater vehicle that had a microscope on board, an eyeball that could see the microscopic world. And it could also on board tell you, to a degree, what kind of phytoplankton are blooming out there. Should we go to the North Bay? Should we go to the South Bay? So with Lokahi, we did the same thing, only putting the human element into it. And we were able to sail into the North Bay and South Bay and gather our samples, bring them back to the lab to help steer the decisions that were coming. Now, at the level of professionalism, it was outstanding working with Audrey and JP. You know, I was able to do exactly what I wanted with no diesel fumes, no noise. It was wonderful. On top of that, just being in their company at sea is so uplifting. Their presence and the food they share and the herbal tea, very elegant. So as with the data we collected on Lokahi and what the autonomous vehicle was telling us, they were telling us the same thing, which for a scientist is good when independent methods tell you the same thing. So we spent our time in the northern bay, which was more loaded with the diatoms that can produce toxin. And so 8 graduate students, 1 postdoc, and myself went out on the research vessel Rachel Carson and targeted our sampling in the best place to look for this research, you know, thanks to Lokahi. So, thanks to Lokahi.
Thanks, Don. Wow. I'm glad that my herbal tea got mentioned. Our final speaker is Bryant Austin, who is one of the most inspiring artists and conservationists I've ever met. He has dedicated his entire life to creating self-portraits of the cosmos, or life-size portraits of whales. We've had the pleasure of getting to know him over the past year, and I've been struck by how humble, innovative, and kind he is. So with that, I give you Bryant, who will also have 2 portraits available for a silent auction later today.
Thank you.
Just press the space bar.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's going. It's so great to see all of you here today. And I just met Audrey and JP this year and still getting to know them. And thanks to my good friend John introducing me. And yeah, I was so inspired by their work and their energy and their values. It's a shift that I'm seeing in the younger generations, and it gives me hope. And so, yeah, I have 2 small prints for silent auction and of whales, and I thought I'd just share a little bit about my work, you know. But before I do that, I mean, when I was preparing the presentation today, I was just reminded of a quote from Margaret Mead, which is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has." And that obviously reminds me of you two, and it's something that's I've experienced personally on a smaller scale. Because 20 years ago or so, I had the question of, I had the inspiration to create life-size portraits of whales, and I thought, you know, because I've been searching for something that had the power to move audiences who have no interest in whales or their plight or the ocean. And so I wanted to see if it was possible, and I found that I had to face a couple of fears. You know, there were a lot involved. And the big one was the realization that I had to be 6 feet away from a whale to make a life-size portrait. So obviously I'm gonna wait for them to come to me, it's safer. And so you wait for a curious whale, and when they're that close, you can capture all the subtle details, the tones, the true colors, all the things that make them real in photography. And I started by myself, and eventually a community was formed around me and supporters. I started collaborating with nonprofit organizations as this body of work started to grow, and we planned our first shows in countries that hunt whales, because I thought if we could test this work here, if it has power here, then we could use this as a tool to draw attention to the far more serious issues. Whaling is awful, but it's only affecting 1%, and the rest of the 99% are suffering because of our way of life. And so that was the question. And so I was actually pretty scared. I was afraid of going into, like, Norway was where we did our first show, and where I thought it could be a hostile experience. I wasn't sure. And the way I exhibit my work is to give the viewers complete freedom to explore their own natural curiosity, to never finger point, you know, and to disparage them, because once you do that, you close the door to the possibility for change, for self-discovery, for cultivating deeper connections to what's out there. And I was really surprised by the responses. You know, we had people in tears. It was very positive, record numbers of people coming out. The nonprofits that I collaborated with prepared me for the interviews with journalists. You know, that it could be very heated debates about whaling and the merits of whaling, and I was ready for those conversations, but they never happened. They instead were asking me, how am I not getting hurt? You know, how are they not harming me when I'm working so close with them? And I could share with them that, you know, I share what, as I share with you, is that if you let them come to you, they're very careful. They take great care not to harm you. And those questions that they asked opened up a whole new direction, a whole new conversation about intelligence, consciousness, and care of us. And really the big question, you know, that we're not alone in the universe. It's really left me feeling that, you know, once all that was done, I just felt with sufficient time and care that change is possible. And this is work that's taken a lifetime to sort out and figure out how to do it. And I'm still in process, but I'm finally at the point where I'm starting the next phase of my work next year, and I'm really looking forward to exploring possibilities with both of you and in the coming years, and really just taking this work to the next level. So I hope you enjoy the prints, and I hope that they do find a home today and support both of you in 2025. And I guess that's all. I'll look forward to meeting all of you at the reception and learning about your connections to Lokahi. So thank you. Okay.
Awesome. Well, I think that's pretty much all we have for you here today at this venue. I wanted to thank you again for being here and go over a couple logistics. So to get to the party, we'll have a couple Santa Catalina students guide you there, but it should just be down the road and then to your right. There'll be the 2 photographs available for silent auction, as well as the opportunity to donate if you're interested. And there'll also be some t-shirts and stickers and all of that, and lots of locally sourced food and drink.
And I just want to say thank you again to our speakers. You don't know what it means to us to have you guys here, so thank you so much. And everyone that came. It feels great to see all of your faces and realize how interconnected our community is. So thank you again. Sure, yeah, we can do questions. Go for it, Mick.
So, can you give us some specific plans for 2025? What do you hope to accomplish, and where do you expect to be?
Yeah, so the main region that we're going to be working in is, some of our collaborators have called it the Cabo Pulmo-Loreto corridor, because it's the region in between those 2 sites. So those are 2 marine protected areas. Both south of La Paz is where Cabo Pulmo is, on the East Cape of Baja, up to Loreto. That's the main region that we want to focus on, because I think it has the highest potential for creating new networks of marine protected areas. We do have some other projects in the work in offshore islands off the coast of Baja that also have really high potential for conservation, but most of our work is going to be focused there. And so kind of our bread and butter is going to be working with the same nonprofit we did last time, which is called Pelagios Cacunja. And although they specialize in looking at elasmobranchs, so sharks and rays, and how they move about, they actually used shark and ray data in 2017 there was a bunch of islands off the coast of Mexico that were protected just around the islands, and they tagged a bunch of sharks, and they showed how they move between all of these islands. And they showed that to the government, and they convinced them to connect the whole region, and now it's the largest marine protected area, no take, in all of North America, right? And so it's a really, really good strategy, because there's a lot of political pressure on protecting sharks and critically endangered species, but they really have the whole big picture in mind. That's why we also want to collect oceanographic data, so both ourselves and with our partners will be doing that, but then also, right, the Western Flyer which is another boat going down there. They're going across the whole region with really advanced equipment, and they can sample right where we need them to. What else, lads? We got so much.
The gathering ethnographic surveys from the region, so figuring out how is the socioeconomic vulnerability of the region and what are ways that we can build economic resilience for the people too. And then those offshore islands that JP mentioned are the Islas Marias, which recently transitioned from being a penitentiary colony to a potential marine reserve. But there's not really guidelines for how they'll be used yet. So some exploratory work there on establishing baselines, figuring out what's there, will be super key in informing the management decisions for those islands.
Yeah. And then kind of go a little bit off of something I'm really excited about, which is the ethnographic interviews. So that's kind of going from fishing village to fishing village, but also going to the villages that are more focused on tourism and collecting lots of data about what the people there, what they think about marine protected areas, what types of marine protected areas they even know about, as well as like what are their goals for the future? Would they want to transition to ecotourism? Do they not want to do that at all? Because we say, we want to make a marine protected area, but the reality is what people want is super varied. And from one village to the next, 10 miles away, they might have totally different visions. And so in reality, it's going to be more like a mosaic, right? Finding what makes sense for each place, what do people want? And that's also constantly changing, right? Like one group might make a marine protected area, stop fishing, and start taking out tourists, and they're making way more money, and that'll affect what the fishermen around them think, right? And so tracking these changes over time, and then trying to implement what people want, right? Because if people don't want it, it's not gonna work no matter if we can get it pushed through the government. So that's something that I'm really excited to take part in. And then lots of other really small projects. As we sail down there, we'll be towing a hydrophone. One of our collaborators thinks he discovered a new species of beaked whale in this region that almost no one ever goes, that we just happen to be going past. And when you're in a sailboat, you don't make as much noise, so you can listen for that potential new species, and lots of other little things, on top of that.
Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, I have another question.
Okay.
There are lots of research vessels down there, but you're under sail, you're not in a metal hull, you're quiet. What are the things that make your research vessel and your work special that can do things that other research vessels can't?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the question. Yeah. Before our previous expedition, our collaborators weren't able to stay in the field for as long as we were able to, because they'd just be camping on the beach. So they'd have like maybe a panga, like a fiberglass outboard, and be exposed to the elements and then be camping. But with our vessel, we have electrical self-sufficiency, 6 weeks of food, an air compressor on board, and don't use any fuel. So that means we can stay in the field for very significant amount of time. Yeah.
I think our biggest asset is actually our flexibility, right? So a lot of times they would either be camping to these remote uninhabited islands, which you can imagine is a big challenge. A lot of times billionaires that have super yachts, like 100-meter yachts, they'll say, hey, I'm going on a family vacation. I got plenty of bedrooms. Why don't you scientists come along? But that's a really difficult way to work because they get 1 week in this remote area. And so they have to cram, and they tell us all these funny stories, like they try hauling up this like massive 9-meter bull shark, and the owner's saying, don't get blood on the upholstery, right? And so it's like, it's a way that they can do work, and that's probably the number one way that they're getting to some of these really distant places, but it's, suboptimal. So they're much more excited about coming with us because, we don't have, it's not this date to this date. We're super weather dependent and we're really flexible, right? We're in Mexico for a year. So if the weather's bad, we just hang out and we wait, and then the weather's good, pile on, and we go and we stay as long as we can, right? And so just the number of days that we got in the field together was just way more than people normally can. Also, right, sometimes like live aboard dive boats will go and they'll spend a week or 2 weeks and they'll get a few positions. But again, the same problems, really limited in time. If the weather's bad, they'll just cancel an island and they won't be able to visit it altogether instead of, we could like wait around and check it out. So I really think kind of like, what I've been thinking about is by being a small organization, we're really flexible. And doing good science really benefits from being really flexible, especially in the ocean, which is constantly changing, and having that ability to, dance with it. Sailing, they always say the most dangerous thing is the schedule, right? And so I think that might be our best asset, is that we have a little bit less of a schedule than these large research boats. Yeah.
Do the regulations in the marine protected areas distinguish sustenance fishing or farming versus corporate?
Yeah.
Big fisheries?
Yeah, there's so many different types of marine protected areas in Mexico. There's down from the government, and then the fishermen will just get together and say, let's not fish here, even codify that into law and manage it themselves. And then within it, there's all sorts of things. So they might say, oh, you can only use hand lines, or there's no shrimp trawlers. Pretty much anything you can think of, there is some kind of a tool that you can use to make that happen. And so one of the big things that we need to do to help create good protection is, again, figure out what this mosaic, it's not going to be like, this is protected, this isn't, this is protected, this isn't, da-da-da. It's more like, okay, here let's not do shrimp trawling. Here let's only do this kind for this species. Here, just no fishing sharks whatsoever. And so it's really more complicated than sometimes we make it out to be. But there are lots of different tools with different, political difficulties in enacting too. So some are just easier to get done. So those might be good tools in the short term, but others, in the long, yeah. So lots of different tools.
What made you guys decide to do the Gulf of Mexico and La Paz? You're from the East Coast and you're, of course, from here. What made you decide to go down there instead of doing some hometown areas?
That's a super good question too. I think sort of like what we mentioned, that there's such a high conservation potential in Mexico. Here in California, we have a huge system of marine protected areas, a ton of funding for those sanctuaries. And then down in Mexico, it just felt like we could leverage our abilities to do a lot more. And then also sort of JP being from Argentina and maybe me being bilingual, we realized we have a unique opportunity to work in Latin America and really love Latin culture, and it's also a great place to have a sailboat.
Yeah.
I think all of those things are totally true. Another thing was, at the time we bought a boat, we just bought the biggest boat we could afford, which happened to be a 36-foot sailboat. And when we got it, we were like, okay, where can we actually be useful, right? And it just so happens the Gulf of California checks a ton of boxes. It's a Latin American capital of marine biology. There's a ton of biodiversity, but there's also a lot of ecosystemic degradation with potential for recuperation. And we can comfortably, safely anchor our boat on these remote islands with really good weather to get to, stay there most of the year. There's no huge storms, or if there are, we can kind of, lots of good anchorages to tuck into and dodge them, versus the California coast, especially the Northern California coast, is, as you know, a much harder place to work, especially from a small 36-foot boat. But as you saw, we have dreams of working in a lot more places. But right now we're working where we know we can get the best bang for our buck.
Awesome, thank you. Well, to piggyback off of that question, I'm wondering, since education's my thing, are you guys planning on collecting data on how educating people to protect the planet is going to have long-term effects in areas? I don't know if that would be a useful thing to know.
I'd never thought about collecting data on the data collection. But that's what we need.
You're hired.
Yeah. I think I would need to talk to some educators about what sort of metrics and stuff, but I'd be super keen on that.
I do think about that a lot in oftentimes I think when we're dead and gone, what will be the biggest impact I can have? And I really think that is through the stories that we can tell, because those potentially can reach millions of people, whereas one boat can, even if it's working really hard, has a much more finite, physical, limited impact. And so I think that's just such an evolving question right now with the way that stories are told and media is consumed. And so I guess to me that sounds like a really hard place to do science, but a really, really important thing to think really hard about. I think we tried to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the that there is some social science research on those changes that you're talking about.
Especially if there's storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, yeah. Go ahead.
So best case scenario, you go down there, you get a lot of good data about all these nurseries and you generate a lot of good science. What's the next level on the political level down there that's interested in making these marine protected areas? Because sometimes science hits up the political reality. So how is the state of Mexico viewing good data coming out that argues for a marine protected area? Are they pro marine protected area, or are there a lot of headwinds politically?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the tools that you're talking about for marine protected areas, because again, you can get the community of fishermen to all agree to a really small scale fishing refuge, and then it's pretty formulaic about, you can submit that to like the fisheries part of the government, not like the federal government, and you can kind of put in these refugio pesqueros. So that tool, it's a lot of work, and that's really more partnering. There's not entire nonprofits dedicated to helping communities build these, and so they're the ones that carry those forth. But the first thing you need to figure out is who actually wants this, and then get that ball rolling. So down in Mexico, all these nonprofits are working together. And so, the shark specialist has the same goals as everyone else. So they're all kind of in collaboration. And that's where a lot of these projects involve multiple of these nonprofits. So that's what a lot of the interviews, I think, are some of the most exciting things, because you can find those and start moving those forward. On the big scale, getting huge national level parks with maybe broader but more simple protections, that one is kind of just, you need to be ready when the moment happens. And so politicians are changing office all the time. They just got a new president in. No one really knows what she's going to do. She's an environmental scientist, so people are pretty hopeful. But she's, Latin American politics is really, really complicated. But our collaborator always says is, we have this time to come up with a really good plan. And then we need to make that plan really obvious and simple and have it on a piece of paper. So if we're ever in the same room as somebody, we can hand it to them. And so no one knows when that moment is going to happen, but you need to be ready. And that's what everyone's working towards, right? Is getting that one piece of paper really well laid out. Yeah. So does that kind of answer your question? Yeah.
I have a question related to, I'm sure you're going to be successful. It's going to be a great expedition. You're going to collect amazing data. And it seems you know very well how things work in Mexico. What next? Where do you want to go? How do you think you're going to get there? Moving your bigger forward. I'm just very curious. What's your big dream?
Yeah, well, after 2025, we have to finish school. And I'd be really excited to start a PhD and use the resources that we have at Stanford to start fundraising for the next boat. Because the next boat needs to be able to reach more places. It needs to be able to travel to higher latitudes, anchor in more remote places. We need to be able to dive deeper. We need to be able to see things no one ever has seen before. We need to have more bunks so that we can fit more students and activists and conservationists on board. We need to be able to bring conservationists from Mexico and show them what conservationists are doing down in Peru. We need to be able to work with both sides of South America. Yeah, big boat.
Lots of tea.
Yeah, lots of tea.
What would you have?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, And then I think developing the storytelling piece as well, like you mentioned, because we met with this filmmaker who supports nonprofits down in Mexico, and I said, what's the difference between nonprofits that fail and the ones that don't? And he said, communication. So being able to have filmmakers on board and a team thinking about how we reach that broader audience too.
Yeah. Scaling up those three pillars we talked about, the research, the community building, and the storytelling. So staying small, but getting bigger. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, with that, it's time to party. So